Hello, I'm Simon Harris. I will be your guide through these course materials and your host as you take the course. So if you need anything, please reach out to me in any one of the multiple different ways that are available to contact me. So that's email, phone, or commentary in the comments section of online delivery platforms. There's a small note at the bottom of the page here that says if you're using a format that such as HTML5 and it freezes, then clear your cache, Control F5. So that's why it says click anywhere to enter, because different mechanisms have different ways in, and that means the next slide in some platforms will be a little bit of navigational guidance, but not here. Let's dive straight into the content and tell me, or tell yourself, perhaps pause the video to have a think about what's going on here. Is this welcome back? Well, what I see is three people, one of whom is making a living. Well, I can't see three people because one of them has their shadow over here. They're observing. Maybe they're the truck owner and somebody's taking a picture. So there are three people involved in this picture. One of them, the guy under the truck, is taking advantage or realizing an opportunity. Somebody has a problem and he has a welding machine and he's prepared to put himself in that position. So this is somebody earning the money to feed their children or put the clothes on their back or whatever else they want to spend their money on. Now, if your initial reaction to this was, ooh, wow, that's then maybe you've got first world problems. To put that another way, risk is relative to our situation. So this chap is obviously pursuing opportunity, and some of us may have looked at that and said he has put himself in a significant position of threat. Now, he chose to do that, and he presumably evaluated the chance that his prop would get knocked, and that's why he's got two, and he has a stone behind the rear wheel, which is presumably to stop the vehicle rolling, but then maybe the brakes are on, or maybe what he's repairing is the brakes, and that's why he needs a stone. So he's thought about the risks that he's exposing himself to here, and some of them are upside and some of them are downside. And that's what I hope this course will do for you, i.e. it will take you through considering risk as we need to use it in projects, programs, portfolios to help our sponsors who are investing with an uncertainty of return, but with a certainty of expenditure. And as we go, I'm going to be covering risk in a way that I don't find is expressed in the textbooks that I study when I did my risk qualifications and when I have been involved in doing things like setting program offices up or running projects and programs. The textbooks I didn't find were very much help to me. And what I'm attempting to do here is be of help to you. So I'm going to let's introduce our topic so that you have some perspective on where we're going. So our journey, well, that was a little bit of reality, and my first set of chapters, or my first set of slides in the first chapter, first module, will be what I think is the reality, what I have found is my reality in terms of the workshops that I run, the people that I talk to and the conversations that I have and the record keeping that I do. And we'll cover that off before we do principles, concepts and vocabulary, so that we've got something for principles, concepts and vocabulary to link to. If we were a textbook, we'd probably do it the other way around, and you'd get all the principles, etc., and you wouldn't know what they link to. So we'll take real-world steps through risk management, and we're going to, before we've finished, add in the techniques, tools, inputs, outputs, record keeping, etc. And we're going to do that in a very non-textbook sense of actually risk is about decision making, and all decision making is emotionally based. If I look out my window here, I can see a bunch of sparrows and blue tits and things flying around eating nuts because I hang them outside the window, and their reactions all the time to the noises that go around them are emotional responses. At some point during this video, I'm very likely to get a cat jump up on the desk, and its responses to everything in the world around it are emotional, and so are mine. Even if I would not necessarily in a workplace environment say, hey everyone, I'm driven by my emotions, That is the reality. So as we go through understanding how to manage risk in our projects, programs and portfolios, and I'm not going to keep saying that. Every time from now on I say project, I mean program and portfolio, and indeed operations and everything else as well. So my experience to date has been that when I try and look at a textbook, I find that it's a little bit less sophisticated than the reality of the environment that I'm in, and I need to add a lot that the textbook hasn't told me, and I'm going to try and share that with you. No, I'm not going to try and share that with you. I'm going to successfully share that with you as we go through the rest of these course materials. So we'll do a practitioner overview, and then we'll go into steps, techniques, tools, and as we go through, I'll throw out some exercises to you, and those exercises will be based on what you need to do in a real-world environment. So they will fit and work very nicely if you have a current real challenge to run risk or support risk. Maybe you're project manager or your PMO analyst in your current role. Maybe you're technical team lead, or maybe you're just participant in a project. In all those cases, the exercises that I'll give you should form a case study for you to take your endeavour through the risk activities as we go. I will cover a little bit about the arithmetic, so I will drop back into textbook land occasionally, and the reason for that is that a lot of people who think they're managing risk talk a lot of arithmetic, normal distribution curves, density functions and the like, and it would be very useful to be equal to that discussion. And actually the concepts that are in here are very useful, but people often do not understand the concepts correctly, and thus they do things like calculate expected monetary value, or EMV, or factored risk, where it's not actually very useful at all, and then they, in inverted commas, retire their risks at times when it's inappropriate. What we do is we retire contingency, but we need to understand the mechanisms for that. So as we get later to the end of the course materials, there is some stuff that might be easier to digest if you've taken a paracetamol just beforehand. Actually, what I mean by that is you probably would need to go through some of the stuff in this course twice in order to understand it with full appreciation of how to apply it. It's taken me 30 years of working in projects and programs and getting some scars on my back, at least metaphorically, to understand how this stuff fits together. And I had to go through it several times in order to get it in the right structure and sequence to share it with you. Something that I've been doing for the best part of 20 years. It must be 20 years ago since I ran my first risk training course. And when I did that, I was a lot more textbook than I am today. So today I am going to share with you where the textbook is useful, but it's not going to be the dominant factor. The dominant factor is going to be things like running the various risk workshops, of which the most important is risk planning, and it's the one that is probably best explained at the end when you understand what we're doing in identification, response development and response selection. And in order to understand planning, those skill sets, those techniques and tools, etc., are the things that you need in your mind, because they are the targets of what the planning does. So I will introduce it at the beginning because we need it there. I will introduce components of what we do in planning within each of the sections. So between identification and response development, we will do some prioritization, and for that we use scales, and scales are things that we define during planning. When we get to the end, I'll summarize all that stuff so it's in one place. Now, in covering the course materials here, you may be a project manager, program manager, portfolio manager, business sponsor. You may be a PMO person, project management office manager or analyst. So in those cases, your role is slightly different. You're not managing the risk process directly, but you may be managing the record keeping, and you may be providing oversight and support and facilitation for people who are concerned about the risks and the risk management process. So as we go, I will take the different perspectives of, if I'm a technical person in a team, if I'm the sponsor, if I'm the project manager, if I'm the PMO analyst, if I'm in a waterfall driven environment, if I'm in an agile environment, what is it that's different about what I need to be thinking about or what I need to be doing if I am to contribute to the overall risk processes or run the risk processes on behalf of somebody else. Something that we'll see before long, because I'm going to say it now, is all risk is owned and paid for by the investor, but typically they don't run the processes. There are very likely folk who are engaged in this course because they are in pursuit of some qualification. I won't pull them off the shelf. Actually, yes, I will. So we get things like this, a guide to the project management body of knowledge, and things like this, the managing successful projects with Print 2, and things like this, management of risk. And I'm not going to take the rest of the shelf down, but there are plenty of other risk and project management related books up there. And if you're studying for a qualification of one of these sorts, then I will provide a supplement that says, now we've talked about how to do risk beyond the textbook, let's just highlight which of those components might turn up within an exam so that you can also be exam ready. But that's not my focus here. My focus is how do we do the job of delivering benefits in organisations through change-based initiatives and cope with the risk. And that's, as I've really already said, but I'm going to summarise, that's mostly about understanding people's psychology and the sociology of groups and our perception of things like threat and opportunity, which are not equal. So it's mostly emotion, but there is some arithmetic and there is definitely some process in there. So here's a look at some structure and some process, but I'm going to explore these later. What these are here to just to show you that it's coming. So we're going to do a little bit of scene setting. We're going to talk about concepts, definitions, roles, and processes by the time we have finished. Because what I want to do is share with you how we manage risk beyond the common, overly simplistic view that is shared in many sources that says one cause results in one impact and that's a risk. That's not my experience. Mostly the situation that concerns us has multiple impacts and potentially had more than one cause, and often has more than one cause. So as we go, I'm hoping to give you the fluency. Now fluency requires that you practice, so I'll give you the skill set and the tools and techniques to do things like create well-formed cause and consequence statements. And as we go through the steps that are over here, or the steps that are up here, so identification, which is over here, and then assessment, which is in here. As we go through these steps, we need to know the techniques and the tools within each step, and identification's secret sauce is definitely well-formed cause and consequence statements. That's the foundation stone upon which everything else rests. If you can do that bit well, that is to say, if you can cause the folk who you are facilitating for to do that bit well, then you are in a very strong position to get the rest of integrating concerns into your baselines or into your working practices, so that not we don't have problems, but they don't become crises and we manage them in a calm and timely and well-formed way as we go. Now, having identified cause and consequence, that puts us in the position to assess their sizes, that is to say, do the impact assessment, and with the impact assessment, it allows us to then prioritise. And that's a very difficult thing to do because, for example, I wouldn't jump out of a perfectly serviceable aeroplane, and you might think that that's really quite a thrilling thing to do with a parachute strapped to your back. So we have different emotional responses to the world around us, and the way in which we might be able to share some understanding of what in a project context is acceptable or unacceptable, or requires some response or requires serious response, is by creating scales. And we're going to see that you need a scale for example, health and safety, as well as reputation, cost, schedule, scope, quality, all the different things. So there's two elements of secret sauce. They're good cause and consequence statements in our condition cause consequence triplet, which I'll come back to later. I will, as I've said, have a little bit to say about arithmetic. I will have a little bit to say about risk responses, because the responses that we can define and then select are subject matter specific. So if you're baking a cake or building a ship, the threats and opportunities you're exposed to are different, but they're part of your discipline, part of your domain skills, and therefore what you would do about the threats, like you're baking a cake and your oven may not be reliably up to temperature, well, you get yourself an oven thermometer and stick it in the oven and then work off that thermometer. You're building a ship and you don't want it to go rusty, so you cover it in the appropriate sort of paint. So whatever the responses are is 90% subject matter expert concern. The other 10% is how do we run the processes that help people to prioritize and make the appropriate selections. So we have got a bit to talk about there, things like categorization, a step or a technique that's often used far too early in the wrong way. So we've got a little bit to talk about in responses, about the mechanics, but nothing about the actual responses to select. And then when we come to managing the process in total, we need to concern ourselves about things like appetite. So would you jump out of a perfectly serviceable aeroplane? I might have done it 20 years ago, but it's not something I'd do now. So we need to talk about managing is about understanding exposure, it's understanding appetite, it's understanding how people's opinions change with position and with things like age. It's typical that people who have who have more grey hair have acquired more, so they have more to lose, so they are more threat focused than they are opportunity focused. So our perception of risk varies not only by our ethnicity, where in the world we are. There's a suggestion in one of the books I haven't taken off the shelf that the temperature of the country in which we live influences the degree to which we are prepared to experience uncertainty. Some cultures would prefer to have certainty even where that certainty is of a bad outcome than they would to live with uncertainty. So we'll need to talk about things like exposure and appetite. We will talk about arithmetic, like expected value, which is the multiplication of a probability and an impact. And in my experience, most of the time, the probability is a completely meaninglessly made up number. And what we need up here are scales. And then we can have some consideration of the seriousness of a risk. We'll also talk about the vocabulary such as residual and secondary risks, contingency, reserves, retirement of contingency, the allocation and freeing up of reserve. And we'll talk about the record keeping that's needed, and we'll talk about record keeping as a minimum necessary, not evil, but you can turn risk record keeping into an industry that adds significantly to cost and not much to value. And when you do that, all you're doing is making the willingness of people to participate in risk management lower, while you're not actually managing the risks for anybody. Writing them down does not mean that some divine intervention will occur. Okay, let's go now and have a look at the activities that as a risk practitioner, for example, as a project manager, I would need to facilitate with my sponsors and project teams in order to be on the playing field and have the cadence of risk activities built into our everyday activities. So that's next.